Coming up on this episode, a new football club gets off the ground in the Vatican, Tromsø hosts their annual midnight match, and a tournament for AI-powered robots takes place in Beijing. Hello, and welcome to The Sweeper, the World Football Podcast made in association with FIFA Plus. I'm Lee Wingate.
And I'm Paul Watson.
And today, after covering the UEFA Club Competition qualifying rounds on the last pod, I did think that we might be a bit short on stories, Paul. But as it turns out, we've got as good a lineup as we've had in a long time. We've got stories from Bosnia, Norway, Northern Ireland, Palau, China and Mauritius all coming up. But our lead story today is from the Vatican, Paul.
I always love to hear those words, Lee. And when I saw that you were saying you had a story from the Vatican, I specifically have not researched this because I just want to hear this as the listeners will be live from you.
Right, well, let me tell you all about it then. It's linked to a story that we talked about at the very start of 2025. It was the story on our first podcast of the year about the Argentine football influencer Valens Garcini and his attempt to transform the fortunes of the club with the smallest fan base in the world. And he settled on FC Bowsers of Liechtenstein, who rapidly gained 400,000 followers and became the most followed club in Switzerland's football pyramid, surpassing the likes of Basel and Young Boys. He was even then flown out from Argentina to Liechtenstein to meet the team and make content. Well, now he's come up with another mission. He wants to create the first football club in a country that doesn't have a proper football club, the Vatican. And I see a confused look on your face, Paul.
Yeah, because we've reported before on the Vatican City's league. I mean, they do have a league for people who work in various different departments, right? Like the Swiss Guards and the museum staff. So, yeah, how would this be the first club? In what way?
So his argument is that they are all staff on departmental teams, but they're not a club as such. He wants there to be a club side that can then play matches against teams across the border in Italy. And that's actually the big goal he set out to achieve, to create this club in the Vatican and then to play a game against an Italian team. And he is using his followers to help him create the name of the team, the crest, the kit, and if you live in the region, he's also asking for people to play. So the progress so far is this. He's got a team name. It is Rayo Vaticano. It sounds a bit like Rayo Vaticano, you know, the Spanish football team. Rayo means, I think, lightning in Spanish. And so the nickname is the Italian word for lightning, which is La Saeta. That's their nickname. They've got a very funky looking mascot. We'll stick a picture up of him on the screen so that the video viewers can see that. And they are now taking applications to play. So the three criteria, and let me say it's a low bar. The three criteria are...
We like a low bar, Lee. We do. A low bar.
You have to be 18 years old, you have to know how to play football, and you have to have at least some experience.
Well,
those are the criteria.
I've got two of those three.
Which one don't you have?
I don't think I can play football. But so my big question is, so they must have got permission from the Vatican City Sports Association to do this, right? Otherwise, surely they wouldn't be allowed to sort of take the name, which is quite interesting that they've managed to be allowed to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea because it seems like he's creating all of it from afar in Buenos Aires at the moment. But I assume at some point he will look to go over. But as you know, like one of the very first stories that we talked about on this podcast a few years ago was your background trying to play for the worst national football team in the world, and you went out to Micronesia. This seems like a very reasonable chance to actually play at a good level if you do live in the region.
Yeah, but do you remember, Lee? And again, I think we spoke about this on the pod, that there was a moment where the Vatican City Football League effectively asked for new teams to apply because I think they had quite a stagnant pool of clubs. But the stipulation they put quite clearly there, which killed my dream, was that you had to call upon players who were already within the Vatican, so people who effectively were there to be a qualification to represent the Vatican football team, you would have to have like a job in the Vatican or a relative with a job in the Vatican. And I remember that being quite strict because for just one sec I fantasized about being an Archivio legend or something. And no, I'm pretty sure you had to be a Vatican staff member at the time to play. So he must have got some dispensation, I guess, to broaden this out, which is for me very exciting.
Well, if you do fancy getting involved in this project, whether it's to submit a kit design or even to try and play, you can follow the club on Instagram at Soy Rayo Vaticano. We'll put a link to that in the episode description. Already, Paul, within days, the club account has 71,600 followers on Instagram. He's trying to get them to overtake Cremonese in Serie A, who have 83,000. That would be pretty insane for a newly formed club in the Vatican to already overtake one of the top flight clubs in Italy.
It'd be very cool in a way. And I wonder what the future might hold. You know, I wonder if they could actually, as you've alluded to, whether it goes beyond just playing some friendlies, whether they would ever have any aspiration to join a regional league at the bottom of the Italian pyramid and work their way up. Because we've sort of seen this, that if you're really good at utilising social media and, you know, the power of influencers, there's no reason really why this club couldn't actually be better resourced than clubs right at the bottom of that pyramid and start working their way up.
I'd actually love to get involved in this. If this becomes a real thing and it's not just a pipe dream, they are able to get it off the ground, I would love to intermittently pop down to Rome and get involved with this. Wouldn't that be great? Even if it wasn't like actually playing, but just somehow being involved in setting up a club. That would be like, I feel like that would give us, we talked about losing a little bit of purpose after San Marino finally started winning games. I feel like that could be a new project for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would be a perfect match for us. And I think between us, Lee, I think we've got some skills. Let's not undersell ourselves. I think we could be a massive asset to a Vatican football club.
Where are you playing then, Paul?
Well, I was going to say the right wing, but it sounds bad in this context, doesn't it? But I've naturally played on the right wing until everyone realised I wasn't good enough, and then I started to play right back. And then everyone wasn't really good enough for that, so I was on the bench. So I think I might have to coach these days, Lee. All right. That's what they say, isn't it? If you can't do it, coach it.
Fair enough. If you do think that you are able to play, then there's also an email address. That's soyrayovaticano@gmail.com. So we'll also stick that in the episode description. And obviously, at the moment, the influencer, he's only posting videos in Spanish. If you can understand Spanish, you can follow the videos. But if not, I'm sure we'll provide some updates over the course of the next weeks and months as to how Rayo Vaticano are progressing. We're going to hop across to Norway next, Paul, to Tromsø, I believe, to talk about the midnight match.
Yeah, which is a very cool sounding thing, and it is. It's an amazing initiative. So Tromsø have just held their second annual midnight match, which kicks off at 10 p.m. So they don't literally quite play at midnight, but they finish the game shortly before midnight. They played against Molde at the Tromsø Arena, which is their stadium. And the reason this match takes place and the reason it's so exciting is because Tromsø are famously the most northerly professional football team in the world. So at this time of year, the sun just doesn't go down. So this match is sort of a celebration of this unique geographical phenomenon that this game takes place at a time it would normally be pitch black, and instead it's played in daylight.
Yeah, and actually I saw a picture that Nordic Footy posted on Twitter. I think this is where we got the story from. And the floodlights were barely on. So it's close to midnight, and the floodlights are faintly on, but it's still so light outside. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing. And it's a real, like... I guess we talk about these clubs, don't we? We talked quite a lot about Bodø Glimt last year because they're in a relatively similar geographical location, and we talked about the fact that those fireworks were set off outside their hotel, but they were going off in the early hours of the morning, and it was basically light anyway, so it lost the effect. And it just kind of does give you a little glimpse into the realities of life in a place that Tromsø. You talk about the most northerly club and what that actually feels like. That they spend 6 months in relative darkness, 6 months in almost perpetual light. It's an amazing thing, really, to see that.
When I did my study abroad semester in Germany years ago, I was friends with a Slovakian girl, and she had done previously a study abroad semester in Tromsø, but she'd gone for the winter semester. So she'd been there between September and January. And aside from the first month, towards the end of that semester, it was all just, she was living in darkness. She'd gone there for the dark half of the year.
Oh, that's a rough bit of timing. It's a bit like when I showed up in Ulaanbaatar to coach a Mongolian football team, and when I arrived in October, and all the expats were leaving at that point. It's like everyone flees for October through February, comes back when it gets nice. So everyone would always look at me with this bafflement of, "You've arrived in October? What are you thinking?"
Isn't that why there's such a massive break in the Mongolian season?
It just is literally uninhabitable outdoors. You know, the temperatures get down so low, and so like this is kind of an amazing thing. This is such a nice thing. The Midnatt Soul Camp is like a celebration of Tromsø's unique status, but also this has worked out pretty well for them because they won this game, which is their 7th win in a row, and Tromsø are actually 3rd at the moment, which is a massive achievement for them, and quite unexpected. They struggled last season. They played their first midnight match last year, and they were at the time just looking to try and gain some ground against the relegation pack at the time. Now they are 4th, I think. Maybe they moved up to 3rd with this win. They could even move into 2nd if they win their games in hand. So yeah, what a great time to be in Tromsø.
I actually, when we were preparing for this, I was putting out some social media content at the time, and I worked out what the southernmost top-flight football team is in the world, FIFA countries only, so that we could potentially suggest having a Tromsø versus the southernmost club in the world. Have you? I don't know if you've seen that tweet at the time of recording. Do you know who it is?
I have seen it, and I wouldn't have got it right. Is it Dunedin, in New Zealand? Yeah. I wouldn't have got that. I would have thought it was in Argentina. Right in the south of Argentina. There, like Ushuaia and that area, there's a league which I think is called the End of the World League, which is like their regional league. And I thought that was south, but actually looking at your tweet and then looking at it, I was like, oh yeah, Dunedin is south.
I mean, I think Ushuaia is definitely further south than that, but I limited it to top flight teams only. So I think the southernmost one in Argentina in the Primera División was still Buenos Aires province. So it's still, further north than Dunedin. But then I had to look through all the map of New Zealand and try and work out which one was furthest south. Someone said, "Where are we going to play that game? China? Halfway house?"
Imagine our climate change impact trying to explain that one. Yeah, we flew them both half the length of the world for this. But yeah, and I suppose the same with Tromsø, right? They're the most northerly professional team. I think in the past we've maybe covered clubs that are even further north, or at least football games that have taken place. I think we spoke about the fact there was a game in Svalbard, in the Norwegian sort of island and territory of Svalbard, which is, I think, even further north, but there's no organised, certainly no professional team there. So I guess it always depends on where you draw a line, doesn't it, between football existing in some form or football existing in a slightly more structured official form.
Those are the only 2 clubs in the Arctic Circle in sort of European top flight leagues, aren't they? Tromsø and Bodø Glimt. But is it Oulu in Finland? Are they close to the Arctic Circle?
Yeah, they are, because they're in Rovaniemi. And we talk about Rovaniemi because it's where FC Santa Claus are from, right? Mm-hmm. The famous FC Santa Claus. And I think they kicked off a game at 11 p.m. in Rovaniemi. The club Oulu kicked off their game that late. Like last week or the week before. But yeah, they're not actually quite in the Arctic Circle. I think it's like right on the edge. Although, again, my Arctic Circle knowledge is maybe not 100%.
In Spain, don't they regularly play games, like league games, really late at night, like 10 or 11-ish, simply because it's so hot that's the only time of day that they want to play?
Yeah. So it's not that unusual for games to be really late in Spain, especially if they go to extra time. There's definitely a culture of starting later. It's a culture of doing everything later in Spain, right? I remember like being
eating, sleeping, all of it,
right. And there's this kind of it's almost become a kind of cliche that people are like, if you want to go out for a night out in Spain, and like there's Brits there at 8 p.m, like, all right, I'm ready to go, and the Spanish are like, what? We go out at like 2 a.m. Like, what are you doing here? And I think that is a genuine thing, isn't it? Yeah. That everything is done a bit later in Spain.
Yes. Tromsø, by the way, don't know if you know this, Paul, is an island club, even though it's on Norway's mainland. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
It's on the island of Tromsø, which is right, as you've said, at the northern tip of Norway, but inland. It's sort of an inland island connected by bridges on either side. And that got me thinking about other clubs that are actually island clubs that you might not know are island clubs. I've got 3 examples. I think they get progressively more exciting. So the first one I found is the 2022 Swedish champions, BK Häcken, whose stadium is on an island in the north of Gothenburg. They were the first ones I found. The second one, Portsmouth, although maybe that's not so unknown, right? That's on Portsea Island.
You know, I knew that, but I think I only knew that because you maybe told me before. I don't think I would have known it instinctively, Portsmouth.
I posted a tweet, I think it was a couple of years ago, about island clubs you might not know are island clubs. And somebody zoomed in on Portsea Island and then went, on Whale Island next to it, there's a football pitch. Do you know what Whale Island is?
No, that's great.
It's like Island Inception. So it's like you've got the UK, then you've got Portsea, and off Portsea you've got Whale Island. And it's a tiny island that I think is not open to the public. It's available, it's like owned by the Royal Navy or something. But if you look at the satellite view, it's got a football field on there. And I really, I think, you know when things are forbidden, you want them more.
Yeah,
I really want to play football on Whale Island now.
Yeah, I want to set up a team there. I want to be Whale Island's coach. I mean, that would be a tough place to go and get a result, wouldn't it? Where you can imagine coaches going, oh, we've got to go to Whale Island next week. It's going to be tricky.
The third one I found is Feyenoord. Actually, Feyenoord is in a part of Rotterdam that is entirely surrounded by a river. And when I first put this on social media, one social media user commented on the post. He said, "Is Rotterdam an island?" And someone else just replied, "No, it's a dump." Not really answering the question, is it?
You've got to love social media.
Yeah.
You've just got to love it for that, haven't you?
A dump, by the way, is not the word he actually used, but I don't want to mark this episode as explicit, so let's just say that he said it was a dump.
No, we also don't want to lose our Rotterdam audience, our famously large Rotterdam audience.
Absolutely. Next up today, Paul, we're going to go to Bosnia, and we're going to talk about title-winning streaks. We've talked at length about the likes of Ludogorets, Lincoln Red Imps, Skonto Riga. They've all won 14 consecutive titles in men's football. But if you extend that record to the women's game as well, SFK 2000 from Bosnia and Herzegovina have just won, brace yourself, their 23rd league title in a row. It's a Guinness World Record.
Yeah, that's an astonishing record, isn't it? And am I right in thinking, I mean, it might be a red herring, but was the club founded in 2000? Because if they were, that means they've won basically every title, close on, right? They've won almost every title since they existed. Yeah,
well, the Bosnia and Herzegovina Women's Premier League was only launched in 2001 to 2002. So they've actually won every edition bar the inaugural season. There was one other club that won it before them, and they have won it every season since. This season, finishing 21 points clear at the top of the table. I do feel for the team in second, Emina, who have finished as runners-up for 6 seasons in a row. They must be sick of the sight of them.
Yeah, because they probably would win, other leagues, but they're just stuck in this league where there's such a dominant side. Mm-hmm. Do we know, why are they so dominant? Is there any one solid reason for that? It's not, often in men's football, when you look at this, probably in women's football too, it will just be money. We often have this discussion, don't we? Why are they so dominant? We're looking for great reasons. It's just, they're backed by a billionaire. But is there something that has made them so successful?
I mean, there's a good piece on this on The Guardian. I think they just seem to be incredibly well run. They've got a lot of former players in key positions. They seem to have the best players, the best women's players in Bosnia. There might be some more deep-rooted reasons for that, but I'll stick the Guardian piece in the episode description so people can read it, because it was super interesting. The main thing that I took away from that is they're the ultimate example of a big fish in a small pond, but when they then play in Europe, they really struggle, so that leap is really hard for them to make. So the last time they reached the last 32 of the UEFA Women's Champions League, in 2019, they played against Chelsea and lost 11-0 on aggregate.
Yeah, I think I remember that game, in fact. And yeah, that really good example there, as you say, of like, it's difficult if you dominate that domestic league and then you come up against sort of another level of club. How do you get to that point? Is there, Because wasn't there talk of an interim competition, like an equivalent of the Conference League in women's football?
Yeah, there's actually going to be a new competition that's starting, I think, in the 25 to 6 season, the Women's Europa Cup. So it's going to sort of be like a secondary continental club competition. But Bosnia at the moment are just going to miss out on a place on that because the top 24 in the UEFA coefficient ranking get a place, but Bosnia are 25th. Ooh. And I think something like that could really benefit the league because if the second club, Emina, start getting into Europe, they get a bit more money in, they start to play against better teams, then maybe they'd be a better rival domestically. But from what I can see, the main solution at the moment to sort of raise the competition at home and also bridge the gap abroad is that they're currently exploring the possibility of creating a cross-border league with other clubs in the Balkans. So clubs from the likes of Croatia, Serbia and Slovenia. And when you think about that region, to me, I just think of it as being, when you see like photos of football fans and ultras at games, I think of it as being an absolute tinderbox. But apparently in women's football, the atmosphere is so much more positive that they really don't have any security concerns. So this is something they're really looking to get off the ground. But at the moment, there's one thing missing. And unfortunately, it's money. Because everything else seems like it's in place, but they don't have the financial resources to do it.
And that's so sad because I think, that is a constant recurring feature of the women's game, right? That money is the thing, the lack of resources, the lack of people investing. Because in men's game it would be security for sure. I'm just imagining pitching that tournament to someone for men's teams, and you'd get the look on the face of,
are you mad?
Are you crazy? But yeah, it's really sad to hear that there is still a prohibitor because that sounds like a really positive idea somewhere between. Presenting European football, somewhere between European football and domestic football for them to grow and also create those bonds on the field between clubs in that region.
Do you know there has actually been a cross-border league in women's European football before?
No, I'm trying to think where that is.
It was a relatively short-lived thing. It was in Belgium and the Netherlands, which is actually one of the areas that comes up when people talk about cross-border leagues in men's football, right? People talk about a Benelux league, but it was in place for 3 years, and then it was basically financial reasons that folded as well. And it's a shame because I think some of these initiatives, they'd be really great to see, but money just seems to be holding it back.
Yeah. I mean, I also love when there's a Benelux initiative, by the way, but as an aside, where's the Lux? Surely Luxembourg should always get one entrant, right, regardless of how out of their depth they are. But yeah, I do wonder, and I hope that maybe, again, every time there's a major women's football tournament, there's a sense of like, wow, actually there is a huge market for this. People are attending, there are big crowds, there's huge TV audience, there is passion for this. And I really hope maybe each time that happens, it raises the chances of the kind of corporate people that need to get involved saying, this is actually a really good use of some money.
I think one of my goals for the Sweeper next season is that we cover more women's football stories, but it's not for a lack of trying. It's genuinely a lot harder to come by the kind of stories that we find. And I always get really excited when we get a good one. So we've had, Ängelholms in the Swedish women's 4th division who didn't concede a goal and still missed out on the title. And then we had the one from Finland just a few weeks ago where they accidentally called up a 51-year-old to their matchday squad. But the sources we use to find stories, it's mainly social media, Reddit, places like that. There are so far fewer women's stories that it's really hard to get them. So if our listeners, if you find good women's football stories that you think are suitable for our pod, please email us at sweeperpod@gmail.com because it's something I'd like to change a bit next season.
Yeah, 100% agree. And, we follow as many of the great women's football journalists, of which there are very many, follow them. But a lot of what you read, obviously, is about the elite side of the game. And that's just obviously not the Sweeper. So it is harder to find women's football stories simply because, sadly, there is a lot less written about women's football. So you're already starting from that position. And then you're trying to find our little niche within that niche.
For our final story, in this European segment, Paul, we're going to be hopping over to Northern Ireland because a very special match took place last weekend. This was between Glenavon and Erzgebirge Aue, a 3rd division team in Germany. Why was this game taking place? Do you remember?
I remember we talked about it on the pod before. Was this because it had to be rearranged, that they thought it was going to happen and then it couldn't happen? But the idea was they were trying to follow up a European tie that had happened back in way back when the Cold War was on, right? Mm-hmm. And this tie had not ever been completed for some reason, maybe because of the Cold War. And they were trying to get these two teams back together to play it, right?
Yeah, that's a pretty good memory as far as it goes. You've got most of it. I think it was the 1960 to 61 European Cup, and Glenavon drew a team that were then called Vismut, who later went on to become Erzgebirge Aue. And neither side were awarded visas given the Cold War tensions. UEFA suggested that they play the home and away legs at neutral venues, but Glenavon couldn't afford it, so they were ruled to have lost by walkover. And Vismut then went through to play Rapid Vienna. But over the last few years, a fan friendship has developed between the two clubs due to some great, I think, social media activity, really. And so it was last summer they played the first leg of this catch-up tie, 65 years later. They played the first leg in Germany, and Aue won 5-0, which I think is quite interesting itself, that a third division German team beats the Northern Irish team 5-0. And this Saturday, they played the return leg in Lurgan at Mournview Park. There were more than 1,000 travelling fans came over from Germany, including a sizable chunk that came by motorbike. They have a motorbike supporters club called the Violet Bikers. And they played this game, which Aue won 2-0. So they've finally completed the tie 65 years later.
Oh, what a lovely story. And I love stuff like this. You've got to say, initially, one of the harshest reasons to be knocked out of a European tie I've ever heard, that one, that they just literally couldn't afford to get to a neutral venue to play the tie. But yeah, really lovely to see the friendship between these two clubs making this a possibility. Yeah, what a lovely story.
We had one great comment on social media. Someone said, original lineups, right? And and I just responded with the gif of the Father Ted over 75's football tournament.
Oh, that would be a really interesting experiment, wouldn't it? I'd be very interested to see what would happen then. I think if the team sheet was already in, right?
Yeah,
you're already submitting a team sheet, guys.
Yeah. I think they did have a couple of players in the Northern Irish club squad from the time did come along and watch it, which was cool. Also, one of our Twitter followers did see it. Liam went to see it, and he said, "I never thought I'd meet a man called Jürgen in Lurgan." That was what he responded when I said, "Was it good?" So
that's it. That is his only note on the game. Yeah. To be fair, that is something you'd remember for the rest of your life, isn't it? Excellent.
It seems like the atmosphere was really great, though. There's videos of the Aue fans like just walking through Lurgan, like thousands of them chanting. It just looked fantastic. So I'm really glad they managed to complete that, and it looks like there's going to be a long-lasting fan friendship there. We're going to finish off this first segment with a quick plug for The Blizzard. We love The Blizzard, don't we, Paul? It's a great quarterly football magazine with some of the best long-form journalism you'll find anywhere and stories from all over the world. Issue 57 is out now. The lineup's great, by the way. You've got stories from South Korea about the bizarre decline of Suwon Samsung Blue Wings. You've got a good one from Denmark about how Brøndby became the first Danish club to reach a European semi-final. And I believe pod listener Neil Shellat, he wrote one about Bhutanese football, basically explaining how there's such a contrast between passionate fans and beautiful backdrops on the one hand and absolutely no money at all on the other hand.
Yeah, that rings a bell. No, it's lovely. As you say, what I love about The Blizzard is, as a writer, a football writer, it gives a platform for people to write articles that are maybe not accepted by the more commercial, dare I say it, slightly clickbaity world that we live in with football journalism. So if you've got a story like that, amazing story about Bhutanese football, you're not going to get that in a lot of places, but you will get that in The Blizzard. And I really love that about the publication. Like I've loved writing for it, and I've loved reading it.
Neil kicked off his story about Bhutanese football by talking about the gross happiness index, which is, I think it's so important in Bhutan that it's entrenched in the constitution. And they say gross national happiness is much more important than gross domestic product. I think that's quite nice.
It is. And the Bhutan Football Federation's YouTube page is called The Home of Happiness.
Yeah, their league, isn't it called the Home of Happiness League or something like that?
Yeah, it's very sweet, isn't it?
Yeah, beautiful. I would encourage everyone to read Neil's article and the rest of the content in issue 57. And Sweeper listeners get 10% off subscriptions using the code SWEEPER10 at checkout. We'll stick a link in the episode description in case you're interested. But we'll leave it there for part one. That's all our stories from Europe. We're going to take a quick break and then return for a rest of the world segment in part two. Welcome back to part two of The Sweeper, in which we'll be bidding farewell to our home continent of Europe and paying a visit to three other continents, Africa, Asia and Oceania. Where shall we kick off this segment, Paul?
I want to start in Asia, I think, Lee.
Now, the story is from China, right? But before we get on to that, have you noticed that in this podcast I'm wearing some Chinese football merchandise?
You see, I did. I saw you often wear really cool shirts for our pod records. I've been trying to read what it says, because it says it in Chinese and then it does have in English.
Yeah.
But your position at the mic,
yes,
I just can't read it.
So isn't it?
I've been buzzing to know what is this shirt, and I thought this would definitely be in the Chinese segment. You're going to mention this.
Yeah, so my girlfriend Sonia has just come back from Chongqing, which is one of the world's largest cities. It's a mega city in China with about 32 million people. People might know it because it's sort of famous for a couple of things. The fact that the city is built into mountains and hillsides, so it's sort of on different levels. But there's also the famous train that passes through the apartment block. Have you ever seen that?
Oh, I have seen that. Is that where it is?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wouldn't have known it was there.
Yeah, and from a footballing perspective, it is the largest city in the world without a top-flight club. But vying for promotion this season are Chongqing Tonglianlong, which is, I hope I've pronounced that right. I'm going to try that again. Chongqing Tonglianlong is the name of the club. And Sonia, when she goes away, she very kindly often comes back with football merch for me. And she came back with this T-shirt and she said, "Do you know the club?" And I said, "Yeah, I do. They're competing for promotion to the Chinese Super League this season." And knowing how much the Sweeper loves an underdog, she just went, "Oh no, really?"
As if she'd been inappropriate in some way by bringing such a glorious team's shirt. She wanted you to say, "No, they're like 6th division strugglers" or something.
Yeah, she'd have been like, "Job well done."
I love that.
But the actual story we're going to discuss from China today took place in Beijing. Am I right? This the AI robot tournament.
That's right, Lee. It's robot football and it's from Beijing. And so this is the first fully autonomous AI robot football match. They played a sort of small mini tournament in Beijing, and there were 3 robots in each team, and there were 4 teams in this tournament. And the idea is that the robots, as I say, were fully autonomous, so no one's controlling them. I always think of robots, I think of Robot Wars. I don't know if you remember watching that growing up, where like people could control these robots with remote controls and they'd go and beat each other up. So people would spend 6 months crafting these robots and then they'd get like destroyed within 8 seconds in a sort of combat. But this is obviously totally different. The robots are put there and they just play football on their own. But what each team was from a university, and the universities, what they could do is produce an algorithm to program each robot. So it's almost like you're a coach and you've like set your team up and you just have to let them go and see how they do. And it's amazing. Have you seen any of the videos, Lee?
I have, yeah. I've seen the ones where so 2 of the robots fall over and one of them gets carried off on a stretcher, which is just hilarious.
Yeah, and this is the thing. I know we won't be laughing, I'm sure, 10 years down the line when the robots are doing this podcast and we're out of a job. The robots are like the pundits. But they were brilliantly rubbish. Like, they could barely stay on their feet. It looked more like watching a drunk Sunday League game. And as you say, the highlight for me was when 2 robots sort of got stuck together and one of them went down and had to be stretchered off because it sort of tripped over its own foot. So for me, it was like a real joy to see that all this a huge amount of money that's gone into this, a huge amount of effort and genius is making this happen. At this stage in our civilization, they're only able to make robots that are truly rubbish at football.
I would love to just go back 100 years in time and talk to footballers and be like, oh yeah, in a century there'll be robots doing this, no worries. Just to see their reaction.
Yeah, I know. But this was the thing when I came to watch it, I was like, oh no, they're going to be really good. And because there was to some degree, and I think this is like the marketing spiel, but there was genuinely something that I read from one of these robotics companies saying, in the future, we'll be watching this instead of the Premier League, I think referring to the English Premier League. So when I went to click on play, I was like, oh, wow, I'm going to see some football here. So to watch them genuinely playing, worse than melee, I was really reassured. It was a real sort of sigh of relief moment where I was like, oh, okay, we're still at least a few years away from having to report on the sort of robot games in China League.
Do you think that there will be a point where humans will play against robots on a football pitch?
That's the idea. And I think that's one of the aims that they have, is to get a team to the point where they can genuinely play a game against a human team. I kind of guess it is an inevitability, right? To some extent, that like technology will only ever get better and better and more advanced. So I suppose at some point that will happen. Sounds really dystopian, but maybe that'll be the tournament we're all moaning about rather than people complaining about the Club World Cup. It's like, it's the Robot Human Championships this weekend. 6 Chelsea players got taken out again in that.
If any club can spare 6 players, it's Chelsea.
Well, that's true. They'll be the ones signing the robots, probably.
Yeah. From China to Palau, the logical jump, I suppose. We were making some short video reels for Instagram recently, and we came onto the conversation of where would you absolutely love to go and play football, and where is the furthest you've been to see or play football. And out of absolutely nowhere, after knowing you for 3 years, you revealed that you had not only travelled 12,000 kilometres to watch a game in Palau, but you had actually played in the league.
Yeah, and I did do that. It sounds crazy now, but I think it's partly because there was this mystique and this allure to Palau in that it was one of the few places on earth where there is almost no information about football there. You have to scratch so deep beneath the surface to find anything. And I had heard that there was football being played. I'd managed to exchange emails with the president of their FA, and I thought, I'm just going to go over there and see, because it's very hard to get any information from a computer. So, what's the worst that can happen? And it almost seemed like the worst was going to happen when I got to customs, and the guy, very nice guy, said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Oh, to see a football match, see the league." And he went, "We don't play that sport here, man." Turned out luckily they did, but to call it a league was perhaps exaggerating a little bit. It was a lot more like a kick around, hence me ending up being roped into playing rather than watching, which is not something that happens when I go to, say, Italy or, Romania.
How did that happen then? Were you just sort of standing on the sidelines juggling a ball quite skillfully? How did it come about?
I think we all know it wasn't that, Lee. No, I was waiting by the side of the pitch, which is the Palau sort of track and field facility, and there's just a football pitch in the middle, which is like 2 nice goals, but not even properly marked. It's sort of cones. And I was just standing on the sideline and watching the players coming, putting their boots on, started to sort of generate a conversation with a couple of the players. They were totally mystified I was there. Like, they could not get their head around why someone from England would come to Palau to watch football. It just didn't process. And then after a while, they were like, "Have you got your boots?" I was like, "Well, I did actually bring some boots, but that was literally just because I thought I could do some circuits around the track, just to keep fit while I was on my trip." And they said, "Oh yeah, just come and play." And I was like, "What do you mean come and play? Am I on the team sheet? Am I?" And they just looked at me as if to say, "Yeah, this is not as formal as you think it's going to be." Like, there was no team sheet. I think there was a referee, but it's from one of the teams with a bib on. So yeah, it was very much like they could not understand the idea of me not playing. They were like, "Well, look, you've come to the field, come and play."
Did you go on this trip alone?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't find a single other human being, Lee. This is before I knew you. I don't think we even knew each other at all, but even if I had known you, it's a big ask, Lee.
Yeah. It's making me think of that meme where the guy and the girl are lying in bed, and the girl's got the thought bubble that says, "I wonder if he's thinking about other girls." And the guy's got the thought bubble being like, "I wonder if I can play in Palau."
It's just like that, isn't it? Except now Lizzie, like my wife, is probably thinking, I bet he's thinking about football in Palau. And I'm lying there thinking about... Not thinking about Palau this time. Thinking about the Northern Mariana Islands.
Yeah. We actually wanted to talk about Palau today. Beyond the fact that you played and scored there, we wanted to talk about it because as far as we can deduce, it is the only country in the world right now that doesn't have an FA, an active FA.
I think so, and it's something of a technicality because Palau has had an active FA. As I mentioned there, there was stuff going on there. They competed at the Micro Games, which is like a little regional, effectively like a regional Olympics for that area with Micronesia and Nauru, Kiribati, those kind of islands. Palau has competed in those and has done so from like 1998 through to 2018. So it's not like it never was active, but Palau became inactive. So Palau became inactive because the head of their FA, who was doing all the kind of hard work and driving the sport, left for a really good job in Japan. Then his replacement, who was there when I visited, also left to go to, I think, Alaska of all places. Someone else sort of took charge, but I don't know that there's anything massively going on right now. And I think their track and field facility where I saw that game, in fact, where I played in that game, has also been undergoing like renovation works. So as far as I'm aware, there's nobody at the moment really running an FA on Palau. And why that's become unique is because since my trip, the Marshall Islands set up their first FA. They were the last nation on earth to set up an FA of any kind. They've never had one. They do now. Nauru has rejuvenated its football association, although they haven't massively done a lot yet. They do have a football association. And I believe that leaves Palau as currently the only nation without an active football association. That said, I might get an angry email tomorrow saying, actually, I took over the role of presidency and I resent this. But it is interesting because Palau had been associate members of Oceania Football in 2006. They were removed at some point, nobody knows quite where. They'd even tried to join East Asian Football Federation. But it's really indicative of football in that tiny bit of the world where one person is running this voluntarily and gets really passionate. Something in their life changes and they go away or they pass away or whatever it is. And then it's really hard to find someone else because it's not like a job role you just recruit for. You just need another football mad person on this very small population.
I mean, is it what's Palau like as a place? Is it similar to the stories you've told from Micronesia? Is it distinct in its own way?
The thing it's famed for are the Rock Islands, which are a chain of islands that are incredibly beautiful. They're probably some of the most beautiful islands in the world in certain regards. And Palau is known for its diving. So if you're a scuba diver, Palau is a haven. You go out to all these beautiful, pristine, uninhabited islands, and you can dive and see fish that are nowhere else in the world, see beautiful coral reefs, all this, so it has that side to it. And then it has the main islands where everyone live, which are more like, I guess, Micronesia that I've described, that it's, very, very nice in certain regards, but it's maybe a little bit less sort of touristy and shiny and nice. It's a little bit more kind of rough and ready.
Finally, for Palau, Paul, I want you to talk us through the goal. Play by play. How did you score your goal in Palau? Relive it for us.
So, Lee, I'm 65 yards out. I slalom between 7 different... No, that would be a lie, wouldn't you? What actually is really funny about this goal is I was in no shape to be playing on this pitch because they obviously were really used to the climate. The climate is very hot, very humid, very intense place to play football. You don't want to run for more than 5 minutes. I burnt myself out within about 10 minutes. This is late on in the game. I'm more or less immobile at this point. So the ball came to me just outside the box, as it were. I mean, there wasn't actually a box marked, but it's where the box would have been. And I'm looking forward. There's none of my teammates ahead of me. They're all behind me. And I have two options. I either have to beat a couple of players and run a lot, or I choose the other option, which is just to launch the ball lazily towards the goal. And for the first time in my life, it just went in the top corner. And I just sort of looked as if I'd scored a great goal. But in fact, it was just simply, I could not have run another yard. So I just launched it, watched it go in, and then just sort of slumped and went, yeah, I've scored.
What was the celebration of choice? Was it a little jig by the corner flag? Was it Ravanelli shirt over the head?
I had no energy to celebrate, Lee. I literally stood there. I think one of my players put an arm around my shoulder, almost with sympathy, and was like, good goal, good goal. I think we were already like 4 or 5 down, so I don't think it made any great difference.
All right. I enjoyed that. I look forward to the fact that as we continue to make this podcast, we might just stumble upon more stories like that you've just forgotten to mention. Maybe I'll find out that you scored a goal, I don't know, in Ecuador or Nepal at some point. I look forward to finding that out.
Well, me too. And also, because this is like 7 or 8 years ago now, if anyone out there, this is a long shot, if anyone out there is on Palau or knows people in Palau, if you know anything about football there, please do get in touch. I'd love to know what the latest is. And yeah, we will definitely mention it on the pod if you can get us some information.
We're going to finish this episode on another island in the middle of the ocean, Mauritius. What's been happening in Mauritius, Paul?
Well, it's all been happening for La Cure Waves, who won Mauritius's cup, the Republic Cup, for the first time, despite having to field an outfield player as their goalkeeper for 2 matches in the competition.
Brilliant.
Yeah, which you don't hear very often. As I say, first trophy in the club's history, so this was a dramatic run for them. But they had a short squad. They had injury problems. They had every problem thrown at them. This is almost what was amazing about this run was everything seemed to be going wrong for this club, but they kept progressing through this competition. And their midfielder Fabrice Agustin played in goal for the quarterfinals and the semi-finals, which they won. And I don't think that can have ever happened in a cup competition, anywhere probably. But this club has sort of marked itself out in its response to adversity. So as I say, they're not one of the major names in Mauritius traditionally. They got promoted from National League Division 1 the season before this one. And they won 18 games out of 18, which is a perfect season, obviously, which we love a perfect season. This one sort of crept under the radar a little bit. But this season, their name has mostly been coming up in relation to the alleged inconsistencies in the way the Mauritian football is run. So they've basically, the club has been saying, we've been unfairly treated on many occasions. They said that the FA had treated them with contempt and amateurism. But the reason for that is because their games keep getting rescheduled and changed with very little notice. So sometimes the venue is changed, sometimes the date is changed. And their argument is that this is being done for the advantage of other clubs. I don't know if that's the case or not, but they ended up playing 4 games in 8 days at the end of the season, which they actually finished second in the top flight. They nearly managed to go up and then win the main league. But they felt that they didn't win the league because they ended up with this huge fixture pile-up because their games kept getting moved. And sure enough, the final, which they won of that cup, the date and the venue were changed 3 times in the
No way.
to that.
3 times?
Yeah, and so while I have no awareness and no sort of position on whether this is like an intentional thing or whether they are being sort of unfairly penalised in some way by the powers that be, you've got to sympathise with them, and you've also got to applaud the fact that they did win their first tournament.
It's not the first time we've talked about Mauritius on this podcast. I wonder if you can remember the first time.
Was it relating to Rodriguez Island?
It was, yeah.
Yeah, so Rodriguez Island is really remote from Mauritius, isn't it? I can't remember the exact distance. Is it 400 kilometres or is?
I've got 600 in the notes here.
Yeah, I'll take your notes over me there, but like it's really far away. But they have their own tournament on this island, and they also sent a team to the Mauritian Cup, right? Who had to play on the mainland, I believe, and did quite well, I think.
Yeah, I think it was like what they do in the French Cup with the overseas territory teams, where if they've made a journey of say 10,000 kilometers from Réunion in the Indian Ocean to the mainland, and they win a tie and their next fixture is on the mainland, then they just bring it forward so that they don't have to make that journey twice, which is a very logical thing to do. And I think that's what happened to the Rodriguez Island team, Rising FC, their name is. They travelled to the mainland, they won their round of 32 tie, and then I think only 4 days later they were supposed to have their round of 16 tie, but I think it might have got delayed due to torrential rain, which is a bit of a feature in Mauritius, I think.
Yeah, isn't it an amazing thought though? This idea of like being trapped there until you lose.
Yeah.
I suppose in the Coupe de France it probably only counts for like a couple of rounds, right? And if there was this miraculous run, they would have time to go home because the next round is like a month or 2 away, right? They wouldn't like literally live there until they lose.
Yeah.
I was like, what happened to you?
We just kept winning.
Like, mate, we couldn't lose in the Coupe de France.
We tried to score our own goals. We also talked on that previous segment about Mauritian football, about some of the club names there, and there are some fantastic ones. FC Dodo, There's no current mention of them online, so I think the joke I cracked last time was I presume they're extinct. That's a bit predictable.
Yeah.
You got Petite Rivière Noire, Little Black River, Cercle de Joachim, like Joachim's Circle, and then there's Pamplemousse, which just means grapefruit.
Yeah, which I think is a region, isn't it, or something? Because otherwise that would be a great name. I think it relates to like an area. Isn't there also a team called Bolton Wanderers or something similar? Like Bolton. There's like
City, Bolton
like
City.
a really unromantic sounding name that you're like, you're in Mauritius and you've called yourself Bolton. I'm sure there's a very good historical reason for that, but yeah.
Anything else that you wish to add to Mauritian football?
No, I think that was all I had, Lee. I mean, as Mauritian football segments go, I think that's one of the more comprehensive you're going to get on a podcast.
I agree. I just wanted to give you the opportunity. You're a man full of surprises. I think that's probably it for today then. Another typically sweeper roundup. We do apologise to the Americas and Antarctica for not covering you on this show. Please remember, there won't be an episode in 2 weeks' time. As you know, the football schedule is relentless, and so we'll be taking our first break in 2.5 years. So the next regular pod will be out on Wednesday, the 6th of August. But, Paul, where can people get the usual content and podcast episodes from us during that time?
So if you sign up to our Patreon, which is patreon.com/sweeperpod, we will be continuing our podcast service even through this little gap with some season review material, and obviously you'll also get all our extra bonus material that we put out all the way through the year.
Yeah, it costs £5 a month. I think that's €6 or $7 or whatever else that is in another currency. And let's just say every time we get a notification of a new sign up, it brings a smile to our faces, doesn't it, Paul? It brings us a little bit closer to our dream, which is making this podcast full time, which is something we're so passionate about and that we'd both love to be a reality. So if you want to join up, patreon.com/sweeperpod. Otherwise, as we say, we'll see you for another regular pod on Wednesday, the 6th of August.